Devin Pike with the Dallas International Film Festival. Again, an amazing slate of documentaries here at the festival this year. And Evolution of a Criminal, it almost doesn't seem like it should be a documentary because it's a little bit more than that. It is the story of how a young man who is worried about the finances of his family decides to rob a bank. But the story just starts there because then the young man winds up having to then go back and examine the fallout 10 years after the fact. The person who did that is our filmmaker who's here with us today. It's Darius. Thank you so much for bringing this film to the festival. An amazing, powerful flick. And first off, congratulations on an amazing film.
No, thank you. I really appreciate it.
I'm curious, a lot of people who would have taken these actions as, in your own words, just a dumb kid, would have tried to get as far away from their actions as possible and move from that. You're a gifted filmmaker. You've done several shorts. And your first feature-length film is an examination of your actions and the fallout with your family, the people who were at the bank, and so forth. So I'm curious, when you made the decision to make this film, how much did you have to wrestle with it?
You know, it's one of those things where you don't realize how deep you have to go when you make the choice. When I knew that I was going to go back down to Houston, I was at NYU and I made the choice, and I was really interested in wanting to go down and meet the individuals who were inside the bank. I wanted to apologize, but also wanted to hear from them, hear their side of the story. And that's sort of like was the kernel that just got everything going. And I didn't realize at the time that it was going to be this huge emotional thing because I thought I had distance. It had been a decade, and I was like, I'm in a great space to now reflect back and to talk about this. But one thing I realized early was that, you know, time seemed to collapse, and all of those emotions, all of you know, just the feelings of regret and the feelings of wanting to have some type of cathartic experience, that just, you know, went out the window, and it just became this whirlwind event of a shoot and also just the experience of working on the film, trying to finish it for 7 years. It took an emotional toll. I don't regret it, but it was definitely tough.
What was the easiest portion of the process for you?
The easiest thing was just, you know, the production was smooth. It was a small team. It was, you know, my best friend and DP, Daniel Patterson. We had a B camera op, John Genius, my brother, Keon Bird, and the sound recordist was Ryan Johnson. And so just having that team around me of really close friends and family and that support system was the easiest part. Doing the interviews and also having to talk to people inside the bank was the hardest thing.
Was there someone on you obviously had a list of, okay, and expands obviously as you're fun, well, then I have to get this person. Did you have difficulty getting some of the people to actually appear on camera?
I mean, the bank customers, trying to reach out to the bank customers, that was something that I had set up to be, we would do toward the end of the shoot, and I set aside, you know, like 3 weeks to try to find them and try to convince them to sit down and do an interview, and only one customer agreed. Who's in the film, Pastor Ned, and I was really just so grateful that he agreed to it because I really wanted people to not just hear my side of the story. I wanted you to watch this film and get both sides of the experience, because especially individuals who have been in trouble or are thinking about getting in trouble, a lot of times we don't see the victim's experience. We don't really see what that trauma and that emotional toll looks like, and I wanted that to be a part of this experience. I wanted that to be in the movie.
Were members of your family or friends generally supportive of this project, or were you getting pushback from them saying, just let it go?
You know, they were definitely supportive. I think at one point around 2010, I walked away from the movie for about 2 years. And you know, my mom wouldn't speak to me about it. I didn't want to hear about it. And so they allowed me to have this space to figure out if I was going to finish this thing or not. And everyone understood that this was a huge undertaking, trying to accomplish this thing and trying to get it done. But that support system of family and friends, they were the reason that the project was finished. Because, you know, even though they didn't say anything, I knew they were all hoping that I was going to pick it back up one day and get it done. That's exactly what I did.
We were speaking before we started filming, and I mentioned that it would have been not necessarily easy, but maybe a little bit more comfortable for some filmmakers to dispassionately kind of distance their own experience from the film itself, and you get the reaction from family, cohorts, the bank customers themselves. But what your film does, and I think it's the bravest thing of it, is you take a very stark look at your own actions, your own motivations to it. And it couldn't have been easy to actually have that experience actually on film.
Yeah, it's also just my style of directing. But for me, I always, if I'm going to ask an actor to go out on a limb, if I'm going to ask anybody that's going to be in a project of mine to do something that may be uncomfortable, I'm going to go out with them. It's going to be a situation where they're not going to feel like they're alone. I'm going to walk that walk along with them. And so with this film, if I was going to ask my mother, if I was going to ask bank customers to get on camera and to be open and honest, then I had to set the tone. I had to be like the one that was going to be raw and open and honest. And once they saw that I was jumping in the water with them, they were like, okay, we'll go along for the ride. But as a filmmaker, it is your job to set that tone and to make it clear that this is going to be an experience. It's going to be tough, but I'm right there with you the whole time.
Obviously, you're in the edit process and you're assembling the film. You've seen it through all of its conceptions. Is it still difficult to watch it unspool in front of an audience who has no idea about what they're about to see?
I've never watched it with an audience. I've watched the first 5 minutes, the last 10 minutes, but I've never watched the whole thing. I'm still trying to get myself to go into the theater and to experience with an audience, because every time I see even a few minutes of it, I'm overwhelmed instantly with emotion, and I just have to walk out just hearing my voice, as just seeing some of the imagery. But just even peeking my head into the theater has always been an interesting experience to just see people's expressions, because they're so into it, and I'm like, this is weird. These are complete strangers who are experiencing this thing that I made, in a little closet in New York City. But it's remarkable, and I'm going to one day watch this thing with an audience. That's a good goal. Yeah, one of these days.
Have you had any success with talking to possibly either correctional groups or youth groups? Because I mean, in my mind, it would be an amazing thing to have this in front of kids, to be able to say, yeah, you're going to think that this is a way to go and this is a way out of your situation. Here's what happens afterwards.
Yeah. That's the process now. I'm in the process right now of talking to organizations and getting the film to, just a multitude of different nonprofits, different community centers, working with high schools, working with just juvenile justice, and just criminal justice facilities. That's the reason why I made the film. I love the whole film festival circuit. I want the film to be in theaters. I want it to go on TV, but I made the film to go to those organizations. I want to travel in prisons. I want to go to juveniles, and I want to show the film in front of prosecutors and defense attorneys, and just get the word out. Because one thing about the film, I think it also talks about compassion and forgiveness. And I think in addition to making bad mistakes, it's how do we allow individuals to change their life around and to better themselves and make a space for them to correct those mistakes.
Do you feel that the decisions and the mistakes that you made as a kid makes you a better filmmaker now? It's
hard for me to say no. I would have to say yes, because that's a part of my whole experience. And so that journey has colored everything I do, everything I touch, everything I think about. And so it's, there are a lot of regrets, but it's difficult to say, had that not happened, I would have become the same filmmaker. Obviously, this film, I'm making a film about what happened. So I definitely think it impacted my career.
What are you looking at doing as future projects?
So I've been working for the last 3 years on a feature script entitled The Year of Our Lord. And it's I would call it a contemporary thriller about a young couple in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, whose 7-year-old son may or may not be the second coming of Christ. And I wanted to delve into the world of religion and the media and doubt in a very right now, dramatic, R-rated, in-your-face sort of way.
Yeah, it's the feel-good hit of the summer. I want to see that movie now.
Oh, yeah.
Can you just go ahead and make that now,
You know what?
please?
If somebody would please send me a check, I'd make it tomorrow. I'll make it tomorrow.
It's a powerful movie. Thank you again for bringing it to
Dallas.
No,
thank you so much.
And it's great to see Tish represented, because there's 3 or 4 filmmakers here from NYU.
Yeah. My classmate Sarah Coangelo is here with Little Accidents.
Yep.
So it's great.
And Gene Pesh from the short Mr. Lamb. So trust me, get in, see this film. If you don't get a chance to see it here at the festival, check out dallasfilm.org so you can see the future of these films, because we like to keep up with our alumni after all. Darius, phenomenal job.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank
Absolutely.
you. Thank you.
Hey guys, welcome to Intelligent Faith 315. My name is Pastor Jay. So glad you've taken the time to join us today. We're going to be continuing on with a series we've been doing called Ancient Non-Christian Historical Evidence for the Life of Jesus of Nazareth. So again, if you remember, some of the individuals that we've talked about are famous Roman historians such as Tacitus and Suetonius, or Jewish historians such as Flavius Josephus. We've even mentioned two Roman emperors, Emperor Hadrian and Trajan. And of course, the benefit to investigating this type of historical evidence concerning Jesus is many people, they'll take the position that if you mention, let's say, historical evidence from the early church fathers, Ignatius, Irenaeus, Tertullian, Justin Martyr, Polycarp, guys like this, that kind of historical information shouldn't really be admitted for consideration because, of course, well, they have a historical bias. Well, all of us have a historical bias, but if you just want to kind of circumvent or bypass that criticism, you can just begin to talk about the 17 or so non-Christian historical sources that exist pertaining to the historical verifiability of so many aspects of Jesus' life. So Dr. Gary Habermas from Liberty University, he's done the most groundbreaking research in this area. We're simply reading through this dissertation paper that he has on his website, GaryHabermas.com. That's GaryHabermas.com. Fantastic historical apologist, probably the premier Christian apologist today regarding the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Gary Habermas, without using scripture really, he can verify that the most logical historical conclusion that you can come to with the evidence of about 4 to 6 historical facts is that Jesus Christ literally physically rose from the dead, just like he said he would. So Gary Habermas is an outstanding apologist at Liberty University. I believe that he is the department head of philosophy and apologetics at Liberty. And so we're just reading through his dissertation paper. So again, I just to encourage you to review some of this information, watch our past video posts on this topic, on this series, on the website. You can just look on the right side of the website over here and just scroll on down to the bottom and just look for the series Ancient Non-Christian Historical Sources. Get familiar with it. Go to Dr. Habermas's website, download and print out the paper, and get familiar with this stuff because it's great historical ammunition and tools to have with you as you begin to dialogue and converse with people about the historical existence of Jesus of Nazareth. You're probably not going to come across too many atheists or agnostics who deny the historical, verifiable existence of the man, Jesus of Nazareth, but then again, you might occasionally come across some folks who deny that. Christopher Hitchens, when he was still among us, I have heard him made a couple of comments. Richard Dawkins has made a couple of comments to that. Or some folks may just say something to the effect of, well, if Jesus ever did exist, we surely can't know anything in particular or specific about him. So this ancient non-Christian historical evidence goes a long way to corroborate the historical information that we find in the documents of the New Testament, then also the historical sources of the early church fathers, And then if you put this non-Christian historical evidence next to that, tremendous corroboration and just very, very strongly attested historical facts in the realm of ancient history. So great stuff to have. Just to bring you up to speed as to what we've covered thus far, as I said, we've already discussed some of the ancient non-Christian testimony that was given by Flavius Josephus. He lived from 37 to 97 A.D. Tacitus, he was a Roman historian from 55 to 120 A.D. Suetonius was a Roman historian from 40 to 120. Julius Africanus, another Roman historian from 221 A.D. Thallus, a Roman historian from 52 A.D. And then we talked about a couple of government sources, 3 to be precise. Emperor Trajan, a Roman emperor who reigned from 117 to 138 A.D. Pliny the Younger, who was a government official around 112 A.D. And also Emperor Hadrian. He's another Roman emperor. I don't have his dates on me right here. So, excellent non-Christian historical sources that we've covered thus far. Today, we're going to be discussing a man named Lucian, who was a Greek satirist. He was a Greek author. And then also Bar Serapion, actually a father who was imprisoned in jail, writing a letter to his dear son, encouraging him to learn from the wisdom of past teachers. Among the list of people he includes is Jesus. So we're going to look at these two ancient historical writings today, and we'll see what historical facts and nuggets we can draw out from that, and then put them towards our case for the historical verifiability of the man Jesus of Nazareth. All right, here we go. Other Gentile sources. This is straight from the dissertation paper from Dr. Habermas. Lucian. A 2nd century Greek satirist, Lucian spoke rather derisively of Jesus and early Christians. His point was to criticize Christians for being such gullible people that, with very little warrant, they would approve charlatans who pose as teachers. Hopefully we're not so guilty of that today, right, Christians? Thereby supporting these persons even to the point of making them wealthy. In the process of his critique, he relates some important facts concerning Jesus and Christians. Here we go. Quoting from the 2nd century Greek satirist, Lucian said this, quote, "The Christians, you know, worship a man to this day, the distinguished personage who introduced their novel rites and was crucified on that account. You see, these misguided creatures start with the general conviction that they are immortal for all time, which explains their contempt of death and their voluntary self-devotion, which are so common among them. And then it was impressed on them by their original lawgiver that they are all brothers from the moment that they are converted and deny the gods of Greece and worship the crucified sage, and they live after his laws. All this they take quite on faith, with the result that they despise all worldly goods alike, regarding them merely as common property." Excuse me. That's an interesting historical quote from Lucian. Let's try to see what historical nuggets and facts we can draw out of his material there. From the material supplied by Lucian, we may derive the following data concerning Jesus and early Christians. Number 1, we are told that Jesus was worshipped by Christians. Now, why is that important? Well, if it's in the 2nd century, that's in about, let's say, 150 A.D., this would cut right against that theory that Christ worship developed much, much later and was not something that was originally taught in the Gospels nor practiced by early believers. But obviously Lucian, a non-Christian historical source, a Greek satirist, he gives historical evidence of the fact that Christ worship had already been taking place well into the beginning of the 2nd century. So it just shoots down that theory that Christ worship developed later on. So we're told, number 1, that Jesus was worshipped by the Christians. Number 2, it's also related that Jesus introduced new teachings in Palestine. The location is given in another unquoted portion of section 2. Number 3, we can learn that Jesus was crucified because of these teachings, and Jesus taught his followers certain doctrines, such as, number 4, they believe that all believers are brothers. Number 5, we can learn that from the moment that conversion takes place, they believe that. Number 6, we can also learn that after the false gods are denied, such as the gods of Greece. That was another teaching of Christ we can learn. Additionally, these teachings of Jesus included, number 7, historical fact, worshiping Jesus, and 8, living according to his laws. Historical fact number 9, Lucian refers to Jesus as a sage, which, especially in a Greek context, would be to compare him to the Greek philosophers and wise men. Concerning Christians, we are told, number 10, that they are the followers of Jesus who, number 11, believe themselves to be immortal. Lucian explains that this latter belief accounts for their contempt of death. In other words, they were willing and oftentimes unafraid to die. Number 12, Christians accepted Jesus' teachings by faith. And 13, they practiced their faith by their disregard for material possessions as revealed by the holding of common property among believers. So those are 13 historical facts we can draw from the writings of Lucian. The portion of Lucian that is not quoted, this is an additional document, presents some additional facts. Fact number 14, the Christians had sacred writings, which were frequently read. Fact number 15, when something affected their community, quote, they spare no trouble and no expense. Interesting words we should probably live by even today, right? And then fact number 16, however, Lucian notes that Christians were easily taken advantage of by unscrupulous individuals. And from Lucian, then, we learn a number of important facts about Jesus and early Christians, and many of these are not reported by other extra New Testament beliefs. So that's interesting stuff. At least 16 historical facts that we can draw out of this non-Christian historical source, Lucian, a Greek satirist. Also, Marabar Serapion. Who is that, you might ask? Well, the British Museum owns the manuscript of a letter written sometime between the late 1st and 3rd centuries AD. Its author was a Syrian named Marabar Serapion, a man, okay? Marabar Serapion, who was writing from prison to motivate his son, Serapion, to emulate wise teachers of the past. Now here comes the quotation of Marabar Serapion's letter. He says to his son, quote, what advantage did the Athenians gain from putting Socrates to death? Famine and plague came upon them as a judgment for their crime. What advantage did the men of Samos gain from burning Pythagoras? These are two obviously ancient Greek philosophers. In a moment their land was covered with sand. What advantage did the Jews gain from executing their wise king, capital K? It was just after that that their kingdom was abolished. God justly avenged these three wise men. The Athenians died of hunger, the Samians were overwhelmed by the sea, and the Jews, ruined and driven from their land, live in complete dispersion. But Socrates did not die for good, because he lived on in the statue of Hera. Nor did the wise king, speaking of Jesus, die for good. He lived on in the teaching which he had given. From this passage, we can learn certain historical facts. Number 1, we can learn that Jesus was considered to be a wise and virtuous man. Fact number 2, he is addressed twice as the Jews' king, possibly a reference to Jesus' own teachings about himself, to that of his followers, or even to the wording on the titulus placed over Jesus' head on the cross. And you'll remember that the inscription over the cross read, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. In Latin, Hebrew, and I believe there was a third language, I believe Greek. Latin, Hebrew, and Greek. Historical fact number 3 that we can learn, Jesus was executed unjustly by the Jews, who paid for their misdeeds by suffering judgment soon afterward, probably at least as reference to the fall of Jerusalem to the Roman armies. That'd be in 70 AD by Titus Vespasian when he came and he sacked the city. Fact number 4, Jesus lived on in the teachings of the early Christians, which is an indication that Marabar Serapion was almost certainly not a Christian. Rather, he follows Lucian and others in the popular comparison of Jesus to philosophers and other wise men in the ancient world. So, interesting stuff that we can gain from Lucian and Marabar Serapion. We're going to continue on next week. I don't want to get into it now. We're going to get into the Gnostic sources. The Gnostics are a very interesting and by this time well-known group of early Christian, basically heretics. It was a cult. It was a sect that prided itself on secret knowledge. This is why they take the name Gnostic, it comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means to know. They prided themselves in secret spiritual mystical knowledge. And so we'll look at some of the historical writings that have come down from the Gnostics that claim to be authentic Christian writings, but they portray Christ in a very unbiblical, different light. But we can still glean interesting, valuable historical information from these documents. Documents such as the Gospel of Truth, the Apocryphon of John, the Gospel of Thomas, the Treatise on the Resurrection. So many of you might be familiar with some of these works because there's a novelist who's made a couple of movies today. His name is Dan Brown, with the Da Vinci Code and then Angels and Demons, and he's popularized a lot of these Gnostic documents. So we'll get into those next time, and we'll continue on in our series, Ancient Non-Christian Historical Sources for the Life of Jesus of Nazareth. Hope you enjoyed it, guys. Review the rest of the videos, and do encourage you until next time, have an intelligent faith. God bless you.